Haunted cupboard. There was something off about the cupboard in our dining room. It was an old oak piece of furniture that had been in our family for generations. The dark wood, ornate carvings, and brass handles gave it an almost regal appearance, but it was its history that sent shivers down my spine. My grandmother used to tell us that the cupboard had belonged to a distant relative who dabbled in the occult. It sounded like a story meant to keep us in line as kids, but recent events have made me question everything. It all started when my parents decided to renovate the house. They wanted to create more space in the dining room, and the cupboard, with its age and size, was the first item on the list to go. My father and I struggled to move it, the wood creaking ominously, as if it resisted our efforts. Finally, we managed to slide it into the garage, where it stood, casting long, eerie shadows in the dim light. That night, I had a nightmare. I was in the dining room, alone, and the cupboard was back in its place. Its doors slowly creaked open, revealing darkness inside. As I approached, a cold, skeletal hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. I woke up screaming, my heart pounding. It was just a dream, I told myself, just a dream. The next morning, I found the cupboard doors open. I asked my parents if they had moved it back, but they denied it, saying they had been in bed all night. The tension in our house grew as strange occurrences became more frequent. Objects went missing, only to reappear in bizarre places. The temperature in the dining room would drop suddenly, and we all felt a presence watching us. One evening, as I was watching TV alone, I heard a faint scratching noise coming from the garage. My first thought was that it was a mouse, but the sound grew louder and more insistent. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the garage. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the cupboard. The scratching noise stopped as soon as I entered the room. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, waiting for something, anything to happen. Suddenly, the cupboard doors burst open, slamming against the sides with a force that shook the walls. A gust of icy wind rushed out, nearly knocking me off my feet. I stumbled back, tripping over a toolbox and landing hard on the concrete floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran back into the house, slamming the garage door behind me. My parents, alarmed by the noise, came running. I tried to explain what had happened, but they looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. My father decided to check the garage himself. He returned a few minutes later, pale and shaken, confirming that the cupboard doors were indeed open, but he insisted there must be a rational explanation. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I began researching the history of the cupboard. I discovered that it had originally belonged to a woman named Elizabeth Thornton, a distant relative who lived in the early 1900s. Elizabeth was rumored to have been involved in dark rituals and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her house burned down, and the cupboard was one of the few items salvaged from the wreckage. I also found an old journal belonging to my grandmother. In it, she described strange occurrences linked to the cupboard and mentioned that Elizabeth had used it to store items related to her rituals. The final entry was a warning. Do not disturb the cupboard. It is a gateway to something beyond our understanding. Despite the warnings, I was determined to end the haunting once and for all. I enlisted the help of my friend Mark, who had a keen interest in the paranormal. We set up cameras and audio recorders around the cupboard, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. That night, we sat in the darkened garage, waiting. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional creak of the house settling. Just as we were about to call it a night, the temperature dropped dramatically. Our breath became visible in the cold air. The cupboard doors began to rattle, then slowly creaked open. Mark and I exchanged nervous glances, but held our ground. From the darkness of the cupboard, a low, guttural growl emanated. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, primal and filled with malice. A shadowy figure began to emerge, its form twisting and contorting as if struggling to break free. Mark and I were frozen with fear, unable to move. Suddenly, the figure lunged at us. Mark screamed and bolted for the door, but I stood my ground, driven by a mix of terror and determination. I shouted at the entity, demanding it reveal itself. The shadow paused, its form shifting, then retreated back into the cupboard, the doors slamming shut with a deafening bang. The next morning, we reviewed the footage. The cameras had captured everything: the growl, the shadowy figure, and even my confrontation with the entity. Mark was visibly shaken and refused to discuss the incident further, but I was more determined than ever to put an end to the haunting. I returned to my grandmother's journal, searching for any clue on how to banish the entity. The final pages contained a ritual meant to seal the gateway. It required specific items: candles, salt, and a chant in a language I didn't recognize. I gathered everything I needed and waited for nightfall. As darkness fell, I set up the candles in a circle around the cupboard, sprinkling salt at the base. I began the chant, stumbling over the unfamiliar words. The air grew heavy, and a low hum filled the room. The cupboard doors began to rattle violently, but I continued the chant, my voice growing stronger with each repetition. The doors burst open, and the shadowy figure reappeared, writhing and thrashing. I stepped forward, continuing the chant, forcing the entity back. With a final, desperate cry, the shadow dissolved into the darkness, and the cupboard doors slammed shut one last time. The atmosphere in the house lightened immediately. The strange occurrences stopped, and the feeling of being watched vanished. My parents were relieved, though they never fully believed my story. The cupboard remained in the garage, untouched and undisturbed. A week later, we decided to sell the cupboard to an antique dealer. As the dealer loaded it into his truck, he remarked on its craftsmanship and asked about its history. I simply told him it was a family heirloom with too many bad memories attached. As the truck drove away, I felt a sense of closure. The haunting was over and the entity was gone. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear a faint scratching sound and wonder if the cupboard truly took its secrets with it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Sweet dreams, if you can.